The night crept softly over the valley where the old stone castle stood, its towers fading into a thin blue haze. The air smelled faintly of rain and moss, as though the earth itself had exhaled after holding its breath for centuries. Inside those thick, silent walls, life moved slowly, too slowly for freshness, too dark for cheer, and too damp for comfort. Yet this was home to nobles and servants alike, wrapped in the cold dignity of their medieval world. The castle was never quiet. Even in the stillest hours it whispered. Moisture trickled unseen between the stones, dripping softly behind walls. The air carried the taste of age, a kind of staleness that clung to everything. The tapestries, the straw beds, the woolen robes. It was a scent made of rainwater, smoke, sweat, and time. It did not leave. It only settled deeper. It began, of course, with the way these fortresses were built. The masons who carved stone from mountain quarries did not think of warmth. Their work was strength, not comfort. Walls were thick, some 10 feet or more, built to withstand siege and fire. The same strength that kept invaders out also kept the sunlight, warmth, and wind from coming in. The stone drank up moisture from the air and returned it as chill mist through the nights. Every breath in the great hall felt like inhaling through wet cloth. At dawn, the castle woke reluctantly. Fires struggled to catch in the hearths, their smoke curling toward the low ceilings before escaping through narrow flues. Servants coughed, their feet slipping on damp flagstones. The smell of wood smoke joined the older, heavier scent that lingered, a mix of unwashed wool, animal hay, and the faint sourness of damp rushes spread across the floors. To live in such air was to grow used to it, though even the most hardened knights secretly longed for the open wind. Beyond the hall, in the sleeping chambers, moisture gathered like breath on cold glass. The stone walls glistened when touched by candlelight, and the air near the windows always held a thin veil of fog. Windows themselves were narrow slits designed to keep arrows out, not warmth in. Even when the sun broke free from clouds, its light could barely slip through. The rooms remained dim, even at midday, heavy with the scent of humanity trapped within. The castle kitchens were no better. Fires burned all day there, blackening ceilings with soot. The cooks sweated through their tunics, stirring pots of meat and grain over smoky flames. Fat crackled, oil hissed, and each meal filled the corridors with the dense odor of roasting flesh and spilled ale. It might have been pleasant at first, but the smell did not vanish when the meal ended. It settled into the very walls, becoming part of the building's own breath. Smoke, grease, and moisture intertwined, until no amount of scrubbing could separate them. Servants mopped the floors with buckets of cold water, spreading the damp, rather than curing it. In winter, the water froze overnight, and every morning began with the same scraping of frost and lighting of new fires. There was never a dry season inside. Even in summer, the cool stone held the ghost of rain. The only warmth came from the bodies of those who lived there, hundreds of them, packed close together, breathing the same thick air. At the lower levels, beneath the castle where sunlight never touched, the smell changed. The cellars were darker, wetter, and far more honest about their nature. Barrels of ale and wine stood sweating in the damp, their wooden sides slick with moisture. Rats scurried between piles of grain. Water trickled down through the cracks in the ceiling, forming tiny pools that reflected candlelight like trembling mirrors. Sometimes, when storms came, the entire floor would flood, and when the water retreated, it left behind a smell of rot and earth that lingered for weeks. The great lords who owned these castles did not see much of this. Their lives unfolded above in the upper chambers, where tapestries hung thick to block the drafts. But even there, the scent of dampness could not be kept away. The fabrics absorbed it, the velvet cushions hid it. Every touch carried the faint chill of stone. To keep warm, the nobles wore layers, linen beneath wool, wool beneath fur. Yet even the richest garments carried a musty odor that clung no matter how often they were aired. And so the castles breathed. They inhaled fog and exhaled mildew. They held the heat of torches and the cold of stone in uneasy balance. The people inside learned to live between those breaths. Night fell early in those days. The fires dimmed and shadows stretched long across the hall. The servants, exhausted from tending horses, carrying water, and hauling firewood, found corners to rest in. The smell of the day, smoke, sweat, wet leather, still hung thick in the air. Some slept on straw that had long since turned sour. Others wrapped themselves in rough blankets that had never been washed, only beaten clean in the wind. Every inhale brought the history of the place into their lungs. The meals cooked, the rain leaked, the lives lived and lost. Up in the great hall, the fire crackled weakly beneath the high ceiling. Ash and sparks drifted upward toward the blackened beams, where cobwebs waved gently in the draught. The hall smelled of smoke and age. At the far end, under a banner faded by years of soot, the lord of the castle sat in silence, watching the last flame struggle to survive. The damp had crept even here. His boots were never dry. His beard smelled faintly of smoke, and the sleeves of his cloak carried the scent of old wool and tallow candles. He was lord of a kingdom of cold. Outside, the moat lay still and green. The water was stagnant, and when the wind shifted, its scent drifted faintly through the arrow slits. Inside and outside were not so different, both wrapped in moisture and decay, both ruled by silence. The castle had become a part of its landscape, breathing with the same slow rhythm as the fog that rolled over the hills. It was not neglect that made these places smell. It was the world itself, the way life was lived in stone. There were no pipes, no drains, no open windows. There was only human ingenuity meeting the limits of its time. Water collected where it pleased, fires smoked as they wished, and people simply adapted. They burned herbs in bowls to mask the odor, hung bundles of lavender and thyme from rafters, and sprinkled rushes on the floor to trap the mud. But nature always won. The herbs faded, the rushes molded, and the smell returned, older, deeper, more familiar than before. The castle was a body of its own. Its walls were skin, its halls were veins. Its rooms were lungs filled with the scent of centuries. It held memory in the way its stones wept when rain came. The dampness was not a flaw. It was history breathing. And so, when the people of that time closed their eyes at night, lying beneath heavy blankets that smelled faintly of smoke and sheep's wool, they did not think of the smell as strange. It was simply life, the same life that pulsed in their fires, their meals, and their battles. To them the scent of damp stone and burning wood was the smell of safety, a reminder that the castle still stood, unbroken against the storm. Outside, the rain began again, soft at first, then harder, until it became a steady rhythm on the roof. Water slid down the towers, through cracks, into the earth. Somewhere deep inside the walls, it began its slow work once more, seeping, pooling, waiting for morning. The castle would wake again tomorrow, and it would smell the same. Morning in the castle came not with sunlight, but with the groan of wood and the shuffle of feet. The cock's crow was muffled by the stone, echoing in strange patterns through the corridors. Servants rose before the dawn, stepping into the chill that lived in every corner. Their breaths turned to mist. The walls, slick with dew, felt alive beneath their fingers. To live inside stone was to live inside a creature that never slept, always damp, always sighing. The first task of the day was to chase the cold. Fires had gone out during the night, leaving rooms wrapped in wet silence. The hearths were black and lifeless, their ashes clinging to the air. Servants knelt arranging kindling that refused to catch. The wood was never fully dry, stored in courtyards where rain kissed it daily. When the fire finally caught, it spat smoke instead of flame, filling the room with the smell of damp wood and yesterday's soot. The smell was everywhere, creeping into hair and clothes, seeping into the pores of the castle itself. Up in the kitchens, the rhythm of daily labor began. Pots clanged, spoons scraped, and water hissed as it met hot iron. Smoke clung to the low ceilings, forming a gray ceiling of its own. The cook's hands were black with soot, their faces glistened with sweat and grease. The air was heavy, thick with the odor of boiled cabbage, stewing meat, and damp linen hung too close to the fire. Yet it was warmth, and warmth was precious. The servants tolerated the smell as a fair trade for comfort. In the great hall, preparations began for the Lord's morning meal. The rushes that covered the floor were changed only a few times each year. Layers of dried grass, straw, herbs, and spilled wine created a strange, living carpet. Beneath the top layer lay months of crushed crumbs, animal hair, and traces of everything that had ever fallen there. As servants swept, the smell rose, a mixture of earth, mold, and something faintly sweet like forgotten fruit. It was the smell of a floor that had known generations. The dampness was constant. Even on clear days, the castle walls wept. The masons who built them centuries earlier had not sealed every joint. Water from the moats and rains found its way in, traveling through the mortar, darkening stone. At first, it was invisible, a quiet presence. But by morning, it showed itself. Dark streaks running down the corners, moss clinging to the edges, the faint scent of wet limestone filling the hallways. The stone seemed to breathe out coldness. You could feel it on your skin, a slow exhale that chilled the bones. Servants moved through this living maze with quiet endurance. They carried buckets of water from the well, sloshing over floors that never stayed dry. Their shoes, made of rough leather, squelched softly. Every task carried the sound of moisture, the drip of condensation, the creak of damp wood, the soft hiss of wet straw. It was the music of the castle, steady and unchanging. Even the upper chambers, meant for nobility, were not spared. The tapestries hung on the walls to block drafts became traps for moisture. Their woven threads soaked up the damp, releasing it as a faint, sour smell whenever someone brushed past. The beds were heavy with layers of blankets, fur, and feather, but none ever truly dried. Each morning, the servants turned them, shaking out the cold as best they could. The smell of wool, smoke, and skin filled the air. It was the scent of lives lived too close together, too long indoors. Candles flickered along the corridors, dripping wax that cooled into small puddles on the stone. The air above them shimmered with heat, but the warmth never spread far. Every corner held a pocket of chill, like a memory refusing to fade. The servants had learned to move quickly between those zones of temperature, a step near the fire, then another into the draft, without complaint. It was the rhythm of their existence. Down below, in the stables and storage rooms, the castle's true odor lived. Horses stamped and whinnied, their breath steaming in the cool air. Hay, manure, and sweat created a sharp scent that mixed with the damp earth beneath. The smell of the animals rose through the floorboards into the chambers above. It was part of daily life. No one expected to escape it. The castle was not a place of clean air. It was a place of survival wrapped in grandeur. The animals were kept inside not by choice, but necessity. In times of siege, they were food, transport, and company. To protect them was to protect life itself. So the scent of beasts became a constant companion, an earthy perfume of power and endurance. The lords and ladies might wrinkle their noses, but even they knew that without those animals, their halls would fall silent and empty. By midday, the fires burned brighter. The damp retreated slightly, but never far. The great hall filled with voices. Knights in chainmail clanked as they walked. The metal rings cold and faintly rusted from the moisture. The smell of iron joined that of food and smoke, creating a layered air that no one questioned. It was the smell of the castle, alive, rich, and ancient. At times, rain found its way through cracks in the ceiling. Small drips fell onto tables, soaking through cloth and wood. Servants placed buckets beneath, emptying them through the day. The dripping never stopped. It was like a heartbeat, slow and persistent. Visitors from far lands often remarked on it, but those who lived here had grown deaf to the sound. The castle's chapel was perhaps the only place where the damp felt sacred. Its coldness was constant, its smell of wax and stone strangely soothing. Candles flickered before statues that glistened faintly with moisture. The air was thick with incense meant to hide the scent of mold, yet even the incense surrendered after a while. The walls absorbed it all, prayer, smoke, and breath, holding each one as another layer of memory. At the edges of the castle, in narrow passageways where the servants whispered and hurried, the air was different, stale, forgotten. Dust mixed with dampness created a thin film over everything. No one bothered to clean those corners. They belonged to the building itself, secret places where time rested. The smell there was faintly metallic, like rainwater left in an old cup. If you stood long enough, you could feel droplets forming on your skin, drawn out of the air itself. By afternoon, the air inside the castle had grown warmer, but heavier. Smoke thickened as more fires burned, and the sun outside, weak and gray, did little to change the chill within. The great kitchens worked endlessly, roasting meats, boiling stews, baking bread. The scent of charred fat filled the air, clinging to hair and walls alike. When the servants carried the meals upward, the aroma trailed behind them, spreading through stairwells and corridors, until even the bedrooms smelled faintly of roasting lamb. Every scent in the castle told a story. The sharp tang of tallow candles spoke of nights spent in vigil. The wet wool of cloaks whispered of hunts in the rain. The acrid bite of iron and oil carried the memory of weapons readied for battle. Even the moldy corners had their truth, that life in stone could never truly be dry. As evening approached, the fires were fed again. The same logs, damp and reluctant, hissed in protest before catching flame. The day's smoke met the night's moisture, twisting together in soft, ghostly ribbons. The smell of burning oak mixed with wet air, creating something strangely comforting. The castle seemed to sigh, as if settling back into itself. Outside, the fields lay dark and glistening, the moat reflecting the first stars. Inside, the air grew still. The walls held their chill close, but the people within had learned to live with it. The damp was no longer an enemy. It was simply part of the rhythm, the slow breathing pulse of stone and life bound together. That night, as torches dimmed and the corridors emptied, the castle returned to its quiet. The air was thick but steady. Somewhere far below, a single drop of water fell, echoing faintly in the dark. The smell lingered, as it always did, not foul, not pleasant, simply eternal. Night draped itself over the castle like a heavy blanket, pressing down on the towers and walls. The last torches guttered and dimmed, leaving corridors in near darkness. The air had cooled, and the damp that clung to every stone became more perceptible. It was not sharp or frightening. It was a slow, persistent presence, like the pulse of the castle itself. Those who lived inside moved with quiet acceptance, knowing that cold and moisture were constant companions. The sleeping chambers, stacked high in the towers, were where the smell of life and stone intertwined most intimately. The beds were simple in design, wooden frames supporting piles of straw, linen, wool, and, for the nobility, heavier feather-filled mattresses. Each layer held its own memory: sweat, rain-soaked garments, spills from meals, and traces of herbs meant to mask odor. Despite careful airing, the blankets and bedding never fully dried. Every inhale carried the mingled scents of wool, damp straw, and human presence. The narrow windows offered little relief. Slits of glass or open gaps were meant more for defense than ventilation. They let in night air, chilly and filled with mist, but they did not circulate it effectively. Moisture from outside blended seamlessly with the humidity trapped inside. In corners where walls met floors, puddles often formed. Small rivulets ran quietly, invisible until a candlelight flicker caught the glint of water against stone. Even high above in the Lord's chamber, the cold seemed to seep from the walls themselves, as if the castle exhaled the chill it had absorbed during the day. Servants, exhausted from the labors of the day, sought rest wherever possible. Some lay on straw pallets in the corners, thin blankets pulled close to shield against damp drafts. Others, burdened by duties that never ended, slept on the floorboards, their ears attuned to the soft noises of the castle, the drip of condensation, the faint rustle of rats, the creak of beams adjusting to temperature. These sounds were not startling. They were familiar, part of the rhythm of life inside stone. In the great hall, where the fires had burned low, the lingering scent of smoke mixed with the ever-present damp. The hall's walls, blackened by centuries of soot, seemed to breathe. Moisture ran down the stones in silent streaks, carrying with it the odor of rain, smoke, and centuries of footsteps. Any visitor stepping inside would have noted the heaviness of the air, but for those who lived here, it was simply normal. The smell was not just tolerated, it was a constant, grounding presence. Animals contributed to the night's aroma. Horses, sheep, and goats were often kept in lower chambers or stables adjacent to the castle. Their warmth brought comfort in the cold, but their presence left its mark on the air. Straw, sweat, and the faint tang of manure mixed with stone and smoke to create a smell that was uniquely medieval. Servants were accustomed to this blending of scents. It did not disturb sleep. In fact, it often became part of the routine, a rhythm that marked the passage of time as surely as the tolling of bells. Water seeped in from every possible angle. Roof tiles shifted with wind and rain, allowing droplets to find their way into hidden places. Mortar cracks carried moisture from upper walls to lower chambers. Even the great fireplaces could not entirely counteract this accumulation. The warmth they provided was localized, dissipating quickly, leaving the castle at large still dominated by damp and cold. Every person who slept here absorbed the chill. Blankets were thick, but the dampness never fully left the skin or clothing. Herbs and rushes were the first line of defense against odor. Sprigs of lavender, thyme, and rosemary were placed in corners, tied to beams, or tucked into bedding. The scent faded quickly, absorbed by stone and cloth. Fresh rushes were laid on floors periodically, but they too succumbed to mold and moisture, adding their own faint, earthy aroma to the mix. Even the strongest smells could not overpower the underlying presence of damp stone, sweat, and smoke. In the Lord's chamber, the difference between the elite and commoners was subtle. The feather beds were softer, blankets heavier, tapestries thick, yet these measures could not entirely mask the chill or the moisture that seeped from walls and floors. The upper chambers retained warmth slightly better, but the smell of life and stone remained. Every breath carried a trace of fire, food, and the accumulated history of the building. Nobility might have enjoyed more comfort, but they could not escape the pulse of the castle itself. Night brought a particular stillness, a sense that time had slowed. The castle exhaled its breath in soft waves of mist that mingled with the warmth of bodies. Drips from ceilings and condensation on walls became rhythmic, almost musical. Sleepers learned to tune themselves to these sounds, allowing them to drift into rest without disturbance. For centuries, generations of inhabitants had developed this quiet endurance, a familiarity with the castle's breathing, smell, and cold. Outside, the moat shimmered faintly in moonlight. The reflection of towers on its surface hinted at a perfect, untouchable beauty. But inside, the castle was alive in a much different way. Its smell told of constant presence, human, animal, and stone, and of survival in a place designed for defense rather than comfort. The walls absorbed every sound and every scent, creating a living archive of damp, warmth, smoke, and life. Rain returned as the night deepened, tapping against roofs and towers in a slow, steady rhythm. Drips found their way into hidden cracks, forming small pools that glimmered in the candlelight. Floors stayed wet despite sweeping, and the air grew heavy with moisture. Yet within these walls, people slept, adapted, and found rest. The smell was ever present, but it no longer caused distress. It was a signal, a mark of history and endurance. Even the smallest chambers, tucked into towers or behind staircases, carried the essence of the castle. Damp straw, wool blankets, and faint traces of herbs, mingled with smoke, animal scents, and the ever-present chill. Every corner held a story, every stone a memory. Sleep here was not a refuge from life. It was immersion in the life of the castle itself. As hours passed, the inhabitants' breathing synchronized with the building. The warmth of bodies slightly counteracted the chill of stone. Fires burned in weak flickers, maintaining a tenuous balance with the damp. The castle exhaled, breathed, and listened. Night was not just darkness and rest. It was a living presence, enveloping every sleeper in the tangible history of stone, smoke, and water. By dawn, the smell would remain, unchanged yet subtly shifted. Moisture would rise, smoke residue would linger, and the aroma of animals and people would renew itself. Sleepers would awaken, carry the scent of night with them, and begin the day again. And so it went, generation after generation. The castle's damp, smelly presence was not merely tolerated, it was woven into the rhythm of life itself. Morning returned slowly to the castle, brushing the towers and battlements with a pale light that struggled through clouds. The air was heavy and damp, carrying the lingering scent of night. In the narrow corridors, dew clung to the stone, cold against the hands of servants as they carried water and firewood to begin the day's labor. The castle never woke gently. Its breath was persistent, cold, and wet, filling every corner before the inhabitants stirred. The kitchens were the first to awaken fully. Fires, once tended the night before, had dwindled to cold embers. Cooks and scullions arrived with buckets of water, carrying damp wood and bundles of herbs. The aroma of stewing meats, boiling grains, and burnt firewood soon spread through the hallways. Smoke and moisture mingled, creating a thick, palpable presence that could not be avoided. The smell was sharp, yet familiar, a sign that the day had begun. Even the smallest movement stirred the odor of yesterday, a reminder that the castle carried its history in every stone, every beam, every corner. Outside, rain left its mark. Water collected in the crevices of battlements, trickling slowly down walls into courtyards and storage rooms. Puddles formed in uneven stone floors, reflecting the first faint light of dawn. The mason's mortar had aged over decades, leaving cracks that welcomed moisture. Stone, wood, and metal all shared the scent of damp, each contributing to the castle's unending aroma. The inhabitants had long adapted, understanding that no task could fully erase the presence of moisture. Sweeping and scrubbing only shifted it, never eliminated it. The great hall was prepared for breakfast. Rushes on the floor were swept, though their earthy scent mingled with the pervasive damp and smoke. Tables were arranged, laden with bowls of porridge, bread, and salted meats. The aroma of food merged with the smell of wet stone and smoke, creating a layered experience. Nobles moved carefully, their shoes echoing softly on the cold, uneven flagstones. They were protected by heavy furs and layers of wool, yet the scent of the castle could not be fully avoided. Every inhale brought with it the essence of fire, stone, and the multitude of people who had passed through these halls before. Servants moved with quiet efficiency, aware of the balance between warmth and damp. They carried buckets of water from the well, poured it over floors, and tended to animals. Horses in the stables produced a musky warmth that combined with the wet earth, straw, and manure. Chickens and goats added their own presence, the mingling of scents creating a constant reminder of life sustained within stone walls. Despite the odor, the warmth was welcome. Bodies and animals provided comfort in a place where fire and sunlight were rare. Chores continued steadily. The castle demanded attention at all hours. Firewood was stacked, ovens stoked, and water carried to every chamber. Even the lord's private rooms required care. Blankets were shaken, floors swept, and curtains adjusted to block drafts. Yet, no matter how thorough the effort, the stone walls continued to exude moisture, releasing it slowly into the air. The smell of damp persisted, tempered only by herbs tied in corners or by the burning of tallow candles. Nothing could fully erase the sense that the castle itself was breathing, living alongside its inhabitants. Upstairs, the lord and his family prepared for the day. Their garments, made from layers of linen, wool, and fur, provided some protection from the chill. Yet even they could not escape the pervasive aroma of the castle, the smell of sweat from servants who had labored through the night, mingled with the smoke of hearths, the tang of iron and leather, and the ever-present wetness of stone. It was not unpleasant, but it was constant, a reminder that life here existed within walls that had absorbed centuries of use. Outside the kitchens, courtyards were slick with rainwater. Workers carried food for livestock, swept away debris, and ensured that animals had fresh bedding. Horses stamped impatiently, creating clouds of warmth and faintly sour odors. Goats bleated softly, mingling their scent with hay and damp earth. Chickens scratched at the ground, scattering straw and water, while the wind carried moisture through every doorway and window slit. Life continued in the rhythm dictated by the castle and its environment. Even the smallest corridors bore witness to the persistence of damp and smell. Servants moved carefully, aware of hidden puddles or uneven stones. Dust collected in corners, settling into wet mortar and straw mats. Mold crept slowly along walls and ceilings, often unnoticed except by those accustomed to it. Herbs, once aromatic, faded quickly, leaving only faint traces to mingle with the larger presence of stone, moisture, and human life. Every step carried the history of labor, meals, and centuries of inhabitants. In the armory, the smell was sharper. Metal swords, chainmail, and shields stored for generations were cold to the touch. Rust formed in hidden places, a tangy addition to the general aroma of damp stone. Oil and tallow, used to preserve the weapons, added depth to the scent. Knights moved cautiously, checking gear, adjusting belts, and ensuring readiness. Even the nobility understood that the castle's environment affected all aspects of life, from daily meals to the preservation of arms. By midday, the castle was fully awake. The aroma of cooked meals, animals, and damp stone blended with the warmth of the sun, weak as it was through the narrow windows. Servants paused to rest, leaning against walls that glistened faintly with moisture. The air was dense but steady, a constant presence. Even visitors could not escape it, though locals moved through it with ease, recognizing it as part of their world. It was the smell of life continuing in stone, a rhythm measured not by hours but by breath, warmth, and the slow accumulation of history. As the afternoon wore on, tasks shifted. Fires were tended, floors scrubbed, animals fed, and meals prepared for evening. The damp never left, always returning to claim every surface, every corner, every breath. Candles flickered in hallways and chambers, offering small pockets of warmth. The smell of burning tallow mixed with the constant presence of moisture, herbs, and human life, creating a layered, living aroma that defined the castle. Even the servants' quarters, tucked in hidden corners or narrow towers, carried the same persistent presence. Straw mats, rough blankets, and small personal belongings absorbed the humidity. The scent of bodies mingled with damp walls and smoke from nearby fires. Every room, no matter how hidden, shared the castle's essential characteristics: cold, moisture, and the ever-present smell of life within stone. Evening approached, and the work of the day wound down. Fires were stoked for warmth, meals were shared, and candles were lit along corridors and stairways. The scent of the day, damp stone, cooking smoke, animal warmth, and human labor, persisted, layering over the odors of previous days. The castle had not changed. It simply continued its rhythm, breathing, exhaling, and enveloping all who lived within. As night fell, the castle returned to the state it had always known. Dampness thickened, smoke lingered, and the mixture of scents settled into every crevice. Servants and nobles alike prepared for sleep, wrapping themselves in layers of wool, linen, and fur. Blankets and feather beds could never fully counteract the chill or the smell, but they offered comfort. Outside, the sky darkened and stars appeared over the towers, faint and distant. Inside, the castle continued to breathe, to hold its moisture, and to carry the layered aroma of centuries. Life in the castle was not always pleasant, but it was persistent. Dampness, smoke, animal presence, and human labor intertwined, creating an unchanging environment. Those who lived here learned to endure, to adapt, and to accept the smells as part of daily life. The stone walls, thick and unyielding, held history in every drip, every streak, and every scent. And so, day after day, the rhythm continued. The castle lived alongside its inhabitants, breathing with them, exhaling the essence of life itself. Damp and smelly, it remained constant, a silent witness to the passage of time, and a home to all who moved carefully through its stone corridors. Evening settled over the castle with deliberate patience, drawing shadows long across the stone floors and dimming the narrow windows. The air was thick with the mingled scents of the day, and yet it carried a peculiar calm. The castle had absorbed centuries of labor, smoke, rain, and human presence, and all of it lingered in the twilight. As the light faded, inhabitants moved through familiar routines, guided by the rhythm of the building itself. The kitchens were alive with activity, even as the sun sank behind distant hills. Fires burned steadily, blackened logs hissing and spitting in protest at the cold, damp air. Large cauldrons of stew simmered, releasing clouds of rich aroma into the hallways. Bread baked slowly in stone ovens, filling corridors with the faint scent of yeast and warmth. The smoke from cooking mingled with the persistent chill, curling along beams and into the rafters, leaving a trace in every room. Servants moved with practiced efficiency, balancing the weight of water, food, and wood, ensuring that the smells were distributed evenly, carrying the presence of life to every corner. In the great hall, tables were set for the evening meal. Rushes on the floor, damp from the morning cleaning, gave off a faint earthy odor. Wooden chairs and benches, polished but still cold to the touch, reflected centuries of use. The smell of roasting meat mixed with burning wood, damp stone, and faint traces of mold created a tapestry of aroma. Nobles and knights entered, their clothing layered to keep out the chill, and yet even their furs and cloaks absorbed the scent of the castle. Every breath drew in smoke, warmth, and the ever-present dampness that defined their home. The stables contributed their share to the aroma. Horses shifted in their stalls, hay scratching softly against the stone floor. The warmth of their bodies, combined with the damp bedding and faint scent of manure, rose subtly through floorboards into adjacent chambers. Goats bleated softly, Chickens scratched at the earth, and the smell of life intertwined with the stone itself. This combination of scents was so constant that the inhabitants scarcely noticed it, yet it formed an inseparable layer in the castle's atmosphere. Servants prepared for evening tasks, ensuring that fires were kept, floors swept, and animals tended. Water was carried through corridors, some spilled on the cold flagstones, only to dry slowly and add to the pervasive humidity. Dampness clung to walls and beams, curling faintly into the spaces between stones. Herbs, though used generously, could not overpower the underlying scent. Lavender, thyme, rosemary, and sage offered only subtle relief, their aromas fading quickly into the mix of smoke, stone, and human activity. The lord and his family retreated to their chambers after the meal, seeking comfort in heavy blankets and thick furs. Despite their protection, the cold seeped through every layer, accompanied by the persistent smell of the castle's past. Wool, straw, and fabric held moisture, releasing it slowly into the air. Even the upper chambers were subject to the same rhythm of damp and chill. The inhabitants had learned to accept it, finding warmth in layers of clothing and the shared presence of others. Candles flickered along corridors and in rooms, their faint light revealing droplets of condensation on walls and ceilings. The air shimmered with heat around each flame, yet the warmth did not travel far. The smell of melting tallow added another layer, blending with the lingering sense of cooking, animals, and damp stone. Every inhalation carried history, labor, and survival, creating a constant reminder of life within the walls. In smaller chambers and servant quarters, the smells were concentrated. Straw beds, rough blankets, and personal items absorbed the day's humidity, releasing it slowly through the night. Servants adjusted bedding, moved clothing, and tended small fires to maintain comfort. The chill of stone was persistent, yet the presence of living bodies and animals offered a measure of relief. Each inhalation brought a mixture of sweat, wool, smoke, and faint herbs, a unique combination that defined the lived experience of the castle. The castle's corridors were quieting as night deepened. Footsteps echoed softly against stone, damp flagstones offering subtle resistance. Drips of water from ceilings and walls continued their slow rhythm, unnoticed except by the most attentive. Even in silence, the building exhaled moisture and history, a constant, living presence that wrapped around every person inside. Outside, rain pattered lightly on roofs and towers, sending droplets into narrow slits and crevices. The moat shimmered under the faint light of the moon, reflecting towers that seemed timeless. Inside, the combination of warmth, damp, and scent created a cocoon of sensory familiarity. Every resident had grown accustomed to the layering of aromas: smoke, whetstone, cooking food, animals, and human presence, woven seamlessly into the fabric of daily life. In the upper chambers, families prepared for sleep. Blankets and furs were arranged carefully, pillows fluffed, and rushes on the floor smoothed once more. The smell of evening fires mingled with the lingering dampness, a soft, heavy presence that settled into every corner. Even the lord and his family, protected by thick clothing and bedding, could not escape the essence of the castle. The smell was constant, a reminder that no matter the rank or wealth, life within stone was bound by the same environment. As night progressed, fires burned lower, embers glowing faintly in hearths. The castle grew quiet, but the presence of life remained. Animals shifted in their stalls. Servants whispered softly in preparation for rest, and the building continued its slow, steady rhythm. Moisture collected in hidden cracks. Walls exhaled dampness, and scents from meals, animals, and human activity persisted. The air was heavy, yet familiar, carrying the memory of every inhabitant, every task, every century of existence. Sleep came gradually, layered with the rhythm of the castle. Bodies rested, hearts slowed, and breathing synchronized with the slow exhalation of stone and mortar. The scent of damp persisted, a constant reminder of life, endurance, and history. Fires burned weakly, smoke curling toward ceilings and rafters, while the chill of stone circulated through every chamber. Night in the castle was immersive, enveloping every resident in its persistent, layered presence. Outside, the moon shifted behind clouds, casting faint, silvery light across towers and walls. Rain continued to fall in gentle rhythm, echoing softly in courtyards and corridors. The moat mirrored the sky, a quiet companion to the castle's own steady breath. Inside, the combination of damp, smoke, animals, and human activity persisted, forming a living senscape that defined the space. By dawn, the castle would awaken again, carrying the sense of night into the new day. Damp would rise, fires would be rekindled, animals would stir, and people would resume their labors. The rhythm was unbroken, cyclical, and persistent. The castle lived alongside its inhabitants, not as a background structure, but as an active, breathing presence. Its scent was both familiar and eternal, a testament to the endurance of life within stone. Even as residents slept, the castle exhaled its essence, releasing faint traces of smoke, damp, animals, and human labor. Each layer of aroma told a story of meals cooked, water spilled, animals tended, and centuries of human occupation. The smell was constant, unchanging, and inseparable from life inside the stone walls. Night ended, but the rhythm persisted. Life, scent, and stone remained bound together, and the castle prepared to breathe again with the coming day. The first light of dawn crept softly over the castle, brushing towers and battlements with a muted glow. Mist clung to the stone, curling along the walls and sliding down into courtyards and corridors. Inside, the air was still thick with the scent of night, damp stone, lingering smoke from dying fires, and the faint warmth of human and animal bodies. Sleepers stirred beneath heavy blankets and layered furs, pulling themselves slowly from the embrace of the castle's persistent chill. Even before the sun touched the sky, the castle began to breathe again. Moisture rose from the stone floors and walls, curling into corners and around staircases. The sound of dripping water was steady and familiar, forming a rhythm that mirrored the breathing of those who slept. It was not disruptive. It was a reminder of the presence of stone, time, and history. The damp was constant, unavoidable, yet it offered a certain quiet companionship, a steady heartbeat. In a world built of cold rock, servants rose first, as they had for generations. Their feet slipped softly on wet flagstones as they carried buckets of water and wood to stoke fires. Smoke rose in curling tendrils, filling the halls with the familiar odor of tallow and embers. The fires fought the chill, creating pockets of warmth that moved slowly through rooms and corridors. Yet the damp never left, seeping through cracks, clinging to walls, and releasing its scent with every stir of air. Animals were already awake in the stables. Horses stamped and snorted, their breath mingling with the wet earth, hay, and faint odor of manure. Chickens clucked and scratched in straw, goats bleated softly, and the warmth of their bodies offered both comfort and scent. This combination of moisture, life, and stone created a living environment in which inhabitants moved naturally, accustomed to every odor, every drop of water, and every lingering trace of smoke. In the kitchens, the day's work began anew. Fires were rekindled, pots and cauldrons set to boil, and bread was prepared for the morning meal. The mingling smells of cooking food, smoke, and damp stone filled every chamber, layering with the remnants of the previous night. Even the herbs meant to mask odor could not overpower the heavier sense of moisture, human presence, and animals. It was a complex mixture, rich in life and endurance, defining the character of the castle in a way that was both constant and ever-changing. Upstairs, nobles began their routines. Heavy furs were adjusted, blankets straightened, and clothing layered against the cold. The chill was inevitable. The stone breathed it into every corner. Candles flickered as they were lit, their wax melting slowly, adding faint fragrance to the air. Smoke from kitchens drifted upward through staircases and slits, combining with the humidity to form a layered presence that filled the rooms. Even with the layers of clothing and bedding, the smell of the castle remained, a gentle yet persistent companion. Corridors echoed with movement as servants carried water, cleaned floors, and prepared for the day. Every task stirred the air, releasing scents of damp wood, wet stone, straw, and herbs. Moss clinging to hidden corners released a faint, earthy smell as it dried in patches of morning sunlight. The castle was alive in a way that was subtle, yet undeniable. Every corner exhaled history, every step stirred centuries of human presence, and every breath carried the essence of life, lived inside stone walls. In the great hall, breakfast was prepared. The rushes on the floor, damp from morning cleaning, released a faintly earthy odor, mingling with the aroma of bread and meat. The table was laden with bowls of porridge, salted meats, and ale. The smell of food rose and merged with the lingering sense of damp stone, smoke, and animal warmth. Nobles and servants alike inhaled this layered presence, accustomed to it as part of daily life. The castle's breath was constant, shaping every experience, every moment. Evening and night had left their mark. Fire residue clung to walls, floors remained damp, and the scent of sleeping bodies lingered faintly in every chamber. Moss and mold had subtly spread, carrying a soft, earthy aroma that spoke of persistence and endurance. Each generation had adapted to these conditions, finding comfort in warmth, proximity to animals, and the steady rhythm of the building itself. The smell of life and stone was a constant, woven into every routine, every corner, and every breath. Outside, the moat reflected the pale light of morning. Rain had left its mark on the towers and battlements, sliding slowly down walls into the courtyard. The faint sound of dripping water from the roof and upper windows echoed softly through corridors. Even at dawn, the castle exhaled its essence: damp, smoke, animals, and human presence. To live within these walls was to be immersed in history, to breathe the story of centuries, and to accept the persistent rhythm of stone and life. As the morning progressed, tasks continued. Animals were fed and tended, floors swept, fires stoked, and meals prepared. The smell of the castle intensified slightly with activity, blending with damp stone, cooking smoke, and the warmth of bodies. Servants moved methodically, accustomed to the layering of scents, understanding that the castle itself dictated the rhythm of life. Every sound, every drop of moisture, and every odor was part of a subtle, immersive environment. By midday, the sun's weak rays reached through narrow windows, briefly illuminating dust motes floating in the moist air. The warmth offered some relief, yet it could not banish the pervasive dampness. The castle's breath remained steady, exhaling moisture and scent into the corridors, rooms, and chambers. Residents moved with awareness, careful not to disturb puddles on floors or slip on wet stones. Every task, every motion, and every breath was influenced by the presence of moisture and the layered aroma that defined the castle. Evening would return, bringing renewed smoke from fires, food smells from kitchens, and the quiet rhythm of night. The cycle was unbroken, a continuous pattern of life, dampness, and scent. The castle was not merely a structure, it was an active presence, breathing alongside its inhabitants. Moisture, smoke, and smell were not inconveniences. They were the medium through which life continued, shaped, and endured. By the end of the day, the castle had absorbed centuries more of human and animal activity. The scent of damp stone, cooking, and living bodies was woven ever deeper into the fabric of the building. Sleepers would soon return to their chambers, to blankets, straw, and feather beds, enveloped once again in the layered presence of history. The rhythm of life, scent, and stone continued, unwavering, persistent, and eternal. The castle did not change with the passing of days alone. It was shaped profoundly by the seasons. Winter brought a sharpness to the damp, a bite that no fire could fully banish. The stone walls exhaled cold into every corner, and moisture condensed on ceilings and floors in delicate sheets. Breath hung in the air like mist, and smoke from fires twisted and mingled with the aroma of wet stone. Servants layered furs and blankets, and even nobles in their thickest garments felt the persistent chill. The smell of the castle shifted subtly with the season, a deeper, colder tang of moss and damp, mingling with the faint sweetness of dried herbs used to mask odors. Winter work was relentless. Fires needed constant feeding, water froze in buckets and wells, and animals required more attention and bedding. Hay, straw, and wood absorbed moisture from the cold air, releasing it slowly into the rooms. The smell of wet earth and animal warmth became more pronounced, a reminder that life persisted even when frost gripped the outer walls. Kitchens worked tirelessly, roasting meats and boiling stews, the smoke filling the air and providing small pockets of comfort. Every scent in winter was intensified, layered with smoke, damp, and the earthy aromas of the castle itself. Spring introduced a subtle change. Rain softened into gentle showers, filling moats, courtyards, and cracks in the stone walls. Moss grew more vibrant, spreading in hidden corners and adding its faint green scent to the mix. The aroma of fresh herbs, rosemary, thyme, and lavender, was stronger as they were gathered from gardens and pressed into corners to counter the lingering damp. Yet the stone always held moisture, and the castle exhaled its persistent breath of wetness and smoke. Servants opened shutters where possible, allowing what little sunlight could enter. But even on bright days, the air was tinged with the constant aroma of damp and stone. Summer brought warmth, but not relief from the castle's character. Sunlight reached the highest towers and warmed the upper chambers, briefly, but corridors and lower floors remained cool and damp. The stone absorbed heat slowly and retained it, only to release it gradually, mingling with moisture and the smells of food, smoke, and human life. Cooking fires became more frequent as long days extended, and animals shifted in their stalls, releasing warmth and scent. The smell of dried rushes, straw, and hay intensified in the heat, mingling with sweat, smoke, and the subtle odor of mold. Even the noble chambers carried the layered aromas of life, damp, and stone. Autumn was perhaps the most fragrant season. Leaves collected in courtyards, brought in inadvertently on boots and garments, slowly decaying and releasing a sweet, earthy scent. Rain returned with more persistence, slipping down walls and pooling in hidden corners. Moss and mildew thrived in the moderate warmth and moisture, and the castle exhaled a blend of life and decay. Kitchens prepared for longer nights, smoke curling through corridors, carrying the scent of roasted meats, baked bread, and boiling ale. The smell of animals, damp stone, and human activity continued to layer over one another, creating a complex and constant presence. Each season brought new challenges, yet the inhabitants adapted. They learned to layer clothing, stack bedding, and manage fires in accordance with temperature and moisture. Herbs and fresh rushes were rotated, floors swept, and animals tended. But the castle's essence remained unchanged. Damp exhaled from stone, smoke curled into every corner, and sense of living, breathing life persisted in every corridor, chamber, and hall. Visitors remarked upon the strong odors, the chill in the air, and the persistent dampness. But those who lived there took it for granted. It was part of the rhythm of life, a constant that connected every generation to the centuries of history embedded in stone. The smell of damp, smoke, animals, and human presence became a marker of home, endurance, and survival. It was a reminder that comfort was fleeting, but life persisted, unbroken. Even in the harshest weather, the castle offered protection. Walls kept out the wind, roofs shielded from rain, and stables provided warmth for animals. Yet the damp remained, seeping from mortar, floor, and roof. The aroma of living, breathing stone persisted through snow, rain, heat, and frost. Every generation adapted, learned to accept it, and even found familiarity in it. The castle was not a sterile refuge. It was a living organism, breathing alongside those who dwelled within, exhaling history and scent in every chamber. Through seasons of cold, heat, rain, and frost, the castle's rhythm remained unbroken. Work continued, fires burned, animals moved, meals were prepared, and inhabitants lived within a persistent envelope of stone, moisture, and scent. Even as days turned to weeks and weeks to months, the aroma of the castle remained consistent, damp and layered, alive with history, and inseparable from the lives of all who called it home. By the end of autumn, the castle prepared itself for winter once more. The smell intensified, the moisture thickened, and the rhythm of life continued without pause. Every scent, every breath, every drop of water was a testament to endurance, to the persistence of life within stone, and to the quiet, living memory that defined the medieval castle. The castle had witnessed centuries of life, each generation layering its presence over the walls, floors, and ceilings. Night fell once more, drawing shadows long across stone corridors and tower rooms. The air was cool, thick with the familiar blend of damp, smoke, animals and human activity. Though the day had passed, the castle carried its essence forward. Moisture exhaled from stone, embers smoldered faintly, and the aroma of living, breathing life persisted. Sleepers adjusted beneath heavy blankets and furs, pulling them close to ward off drafts, creeping along cold flagstones. The chill was constant, yet it no longer demanded attention. It was simply part of life within these walls. Each breath carried layers of scent, faint smoke from dying embers, damp from stone and mortar, earthy aroma from rushes and straw, and the warmth of animals and humans alike. The castle had become a symphony of smells, each element contributing to the rhythm of existence. In corridors and stairwells, the drip of water from ceilings continued its steady rhythm, unnoticed by those who had adapted to its presence. It was a soft, persistent percussion, marking the passage of hours. The walls exhaled moisture and absorbed heat from candles and fires, releasing it slowly into the air. Even the smallest chamber participated in this cycle, releasing dampness and absorbing warmth, carrying the scent of history and life in a delicate balance. Animals slept or shifted in their stalls, their warmth mingling with the lingering humidity. Horses exhaled misty breaths, goats nestled in straw, and chickens rustled softly, scattering tiny puffs of scent into the surrounding air. This combination of life, damp, and stone was inseparable. It formed the essence of existence within the castle. Those who lived there did not merely endure it. They were shaped by it, learning to anticipate the rhythms of moisture, temperature, and scent. The great hall, now quiet and dimly lit by fading candles, retained the presence of the day. Tables, chairs, and rushes held traces of meals, footsteps, and smoke. Floors bore faint impressions of boots and paws, the history of activity embedded in the stone. Even in stillness, the castle exhaled life, a slow, measured pulse of damp and warmth, of human and animal presence, of centuries folded into stone and timber. Fires, tended sparingly in the late hours, added warmth and aroma. Tallow melted in small quantities, releasing a soft, familiar scent. Smoke drifted upward through narrow windows and slits, mingling with the lingering damp and earthy notes of straw, rushes, and herbs. The combination was constant, evolving only slightly with each movement, each breath, each drop of water that fell silently from roof or ceiling. Residents, accustomed to this environment, moved quietly through corridors and chambers. Servants ensured that fires did not die, animals were tended, and bedding remained arranged to maximize warmth. Nobles adjusted blankets, wrapped themselves in furs, and inhaled the layered aromas that had become inseparable from home. Even the upper chambers, with their tapestries and feather beds, carried the same presence, damp, earthy, smoky, alive. Outside, the night sky reflected in the moat, a quiet companion to the castle's own breathing. Rain tapped gently on roofs and towers, seeping through cracks in the stone and sliding into hidden corners. The castle absorbed it all, exhaling moisture and scent in measured rhythm. Every wall, every floor, every beam was an archive of life lived within, cold, damp, and fragrant, with human and animal activity. Generations had come and gone, each leaving traces of themselves in the air, on the stone, and in the fabric of daily life. Children played along corridors, servants carried meals, lords and ladies moved through chambers, all part of a continuous cycle. The castle's dampness, smells, and rhythms persisted, unaltered by rank, season, or century. To live here was to be part of a living, breathing organism, one in which stone, moisture, and life intertwined inseparably. As midnight approached, the castle's rhythm slowed yet continued. Footsteps were rare, fires burned low, and the drip of water became more pronounced in quiet chambers. Yet even in this stillness, the essence of life remained. Warmth from bodies, scent from animals, smoke from fires, and damp from stone mingled seamlessly. Each breath carried the memory of countless nights, meals, labors, and rest, layering the present with centuries of experience. The cycle of day and night, damp and warmth, human and animal presence, continued without pause. Blankets absorbed moisture, rushes exhaled faintly earthy aromas, and stone breathed steadily. The castle had become a living archive, a constant witness to endurance, adaptation, and the persistence of life in a world built for defense rather than comfort. By dawn, the rhythm would begin anew. Fires would be stoked, meals prepared, animals tended, and floors swept. Moisture would rise, smoke would mingle with air, and inhabitants would inhale the same layered presence that had defined life here for centuries. The castle's dampness and scent were inseparable from the passage of time, a marker of continuity and survival. In the end, the medieval castle was more than stone and mortar. It was a living entity, a breathing environment shaped by human activity, animal warmth, and the persistent presence of moisture. Its smell, damp, smoky, earthy, and alive, was constant, enduring, and inseparable from life within. Generations adapted, survived, and rested within this rhythm, carried forward by the pulse of stone, water, and living presence. The castle existed as it always had, enveloping every inhabitant in its eternal, layered embrace.